So people know that a balanced dataslate and rules changes coming to 40k, and now those wishlists are spilling over onto the internet. Let's talk about a supposedly fake balanced dataslate leak and the fairly fun changes that it has inside. Hello and welcome back to War Specs Tactics, where today I thought we'd just make a fun, fairly short video about this fake balanced dataslate leak and talk about some of the options for changing and buffing and nerfing armies that it talks about within. Obviously, as you can probably tell by the title and the thumbnail, I don't think that this one is real, but I have had a fair few people get in touch with me to ask if I can cover it on the channel, so I thought that we would do briefly just for entertainment purposes more than anything else. If that's not something that interests you, then by all means click away now. I feel like it's generally fairly entertaining though to talk through some potential rules changes and the positives and negatives of them. In any case, this rather dubious text leak has appeared on a few Discord pages and the Warhammer competitive page. Generally, it was met by a fair amount of skepticism by the people who read it for the first time, and the moderators of those pages have since removed it. Apparently, some of the sources on Discord that it went through added a few bits to it, like the Gene Stealer cult and Tyrannid parts of it, and confirmed that it was basically made up. The reason that these sort of leaks catch on quite a bit are that the balanced data slate is coming out in January. There'll be a whole bunch of changes to the Warhammer 40k armies, nerfing the good ones and buffing the bad ones, and as mentioned on the supposed leak itself, Games Workshop might well be wanting to make some big changes in the next data slate, as the main criticism that they got from the last one was that it basically didn't really do much. Typically though, balanced data slates rarely tend to get leaked early, as they aren't really widely playtested outside of Games Workshop's core rule team. For the most part, we don't actually tend to know what's coming in them until they actually come out, and particularly less so since they reined in their leaky playtester program. In the update in January, points are probably likely to be the main point of rebalancing as well. They do points updates twice a year, and then rules changes via balanced data slates 4 times a year, and it does make sense while they're on one of the updates that can do points rebalancing. Probably more of the changes are going to be targeted towards the points cost as opposed to adding extra rules to the game. I feel like points costs, while they might take a little bit of a faff to reorganise your army and stuff, they're perhaps a little bit less mental load than adding a bunch of rules. You don't have to remember and reference those rules individually, you can just update the points costs in your army and go from there. The points costs are still all together as a single source for how you build your force. I'd say that's probably another point against this sort of change as well, probably too many changes to the game all in one go, where I feel like, similar to the previous January update, the balanced data slate changes are probably going to be light touch, and most of the changes are going to come from missions and points. Still though, if you're interested, I thought we'd take a quick look through. I feel that some of the proposals are really quite interesting, though I think a few of them sound decidedly off or miss the mark a bit. First up, they say that Flamers get D3+3 shots. I feel like that's probably going to be Flamers of Tzeentch as opposed to all Flamers game-wide. Not 100% sure what they're going for there, but it seems likely that they mean that the Demon Flamers, seeing as they're basically guarantees to be getting nerfed in the data slate, and Games Workshop have all but confirmed it. If they do mean the Demon Flamers, then I suspect they're just increasing points. There's not really any reason to mess around with the number of shots they get. You may as well just have a big Burny Death unit that's equally dangerous to enemy models, but you just wind up paying more points for it for the very good durability against ranged shooting and the massive anti-infantry damage that they can bring. Next up, we've got Admech getting Armour of Contempt, which I feel like of all the changes that you could do to help out Admech, this probably isn't the right one. Armour of Contempt does feel like a bit of a band-aid patch that a lot of armies get, mainly aimed at the Marines and things, but I feel like if you just go exporting it to literally every single army in the game, it sort of loses its meaning and just means that AP-1 weapons don't really do much. I can see the argument for giving Admech Armour of Contempt, I suppose. The Imperial Guard vehicles got it when they needed a bit of a lift when their codex was really bad, and by that logic you could certainly argue that the Admech vehicles should have it, seeing as they're basically better technologically engineered than the Guard ones in general. If you go down that route though, you may as well give it to Imperial and Chaos Knights and Adeptus Custodes too. And then you've got the majority of factions in the game getting Armour of Contempt, probably not the ideal state of affairs for a bit of a band-aid patch that adds an extra layer of rules. I'd guess that they might well be looking to address Admech in terms of points costs, secondary objectives and things like that. If they were to give them a faction-specific rule buff, then maybe they could do something with the Doctriners or the Canticles, I guess. Hopefully something that doesn't add too much extra complexity though, as they're already a pretty complex army to use. The next one they had was Space Marine Scouts moved to the troop slot. I'd guess at least some people will be a fan of that. They were troops before, and it's not entirely outlandish that they might be again at some point. It would allow for slightly cheaper battalion filling for Marines, which could be quite nice if you really want to keep the emphasis on the elites or heavy support or something. But I feel like in general, Games Workshop having gone the direction of really wanting to emphasise the actual Space Marines in power armour, particularly things like Primaris Marines, they're kind of unlikely to want to try and push Scouts to the forefront of the Marine Codex once more. And even if they did, I don't think it would really add that much power to the army. Even with Marine lists gaining a very cheap troop slot, I feel like it is still kind of balanced compared with, say, taking Incursors, which were a lot more durable and threatening to have on the front line in the first place, and actually might survive some enemy fire on midfield objectives. I think it'd certainly be a small power boost to Marines, but I guess best case scenario for a power boost is that Space Marines go back to running 3 units of 5 scouts in every battalion, and then neglecting all the other troops. I feel like Marines could just do with a bit of a points cut on several of their datasheets, might be the easiest way to make them a bit stronger. Otherwise, they had Thousand Sons don't get their cabals when mixing demons. Presumably they mean the Kabbalistic rituals rather than the cults of sorcery, I guess. Again, wording isn't super clear here. Not entirely sure what the person who made this up might have been going for. If the first change was definitely aimed at Flamers of Tzeentch, then it seems kind of pointless to arbitrarily nerf the Thousand Sons if you're already nerfing the demons. Kabbalistic rituals are certainly handy enough, but I feel like if you're toning down the things that they're allying with and you're taking less Thousand Sons in the first place, you probably don't need to hit them even harder if you are making their allies into just kind of normal power as opposed to adding ridiculous amounts of heavy lifting. Next up was a change for Custodes, objective secured on fast attack and elites. I think this one's a bit of a wish list for Custody players in general, seeing as they tended to have army-wide OBSEC in the previous book, including on things like the bikes and the characters. I feel like out of this, I certainly feel that putting it on the Custodian Wardens and the Alaris Terminators might not be the worst. Maybe you could have some sort of restriction for the Alaris Terminators, given 1 model units. You might say that you need 3 in a unit to get OBSEC or something. But either way, it would make them feel a little bit more used compared with the standard troop custodians, who just basically feel like they're doing the exact same thing but a bit more efficiently with OBSEC. I'm personally not really convinced that the bikers actually need it though. They've got 14-inch movement and a very good threat between their range and their melee. And custodians in general aren't doing at least too badly in terms of win rates in 40k right now. While I feel that Games Workshop could definitely improve their internal codex balance, I'm not sure that making objective secured bikers would be the best way to do that. I feel that might actually just hurt internal codex balance, as they're already good at the moment. Perhaps one of the more interesting proposed changes was that Space Marine doctrines all get to stack from round 3 onwards. So I guess that'd mean that you get the Assault Devastator and Rapid Fire all at once from that point. I feel like Marines need something big to help them out at the moment. The majority of chapters tend to make up the worst armies in 40k right now, and I guess amping up damage would be one way to make them a bit better like that. I feel like the main beneficiaries of this would be the Devastator Doctrine chapters, who typically only get 1 turn of their favourite shooting buff. In particular, I feel that this might just push more people to playing Iron Hands out of the various Codex chapters though. Their Devastator Doctrine's by far the best, moving and shooting without taking the heavy weapons penalty, and also getting reroll 1s to hit for their big guns. Would certainly make Marine ranged a little bit better though. Besides maybe Iron Hands, I feel like the majority of the ranged chapters tend to do worse than the assault based ones right now. Things like Space Wolves, Blood Angels, or even Dark Angels I guess, with Deathwing Terminators and things. Rounding out the leaks, we have these 3. Aberrant's getting Core, which I think is something that Genestealer Cult players would enjoy quite a lot. I feel like out of any of the leaks, this one seems like one of the most reasonable ones to go for. In general, the Genestealer Cult Codex I feel like is one of the better internally balanced Codex books out of all of Warhammer 40k. Most of the units are pretty usable, but Aberrant and their Abominant Chosen Ones just seem to be a bit underpowered. Core would give them a whole load of access to a bunch of stratagems and character buffs, and there's quite a lot to go for in the Genestealer Cult army with that. It's definitely one way that you could do things, but I feel like just knocking a few points off the both of them could be pretty handy. They do have their own synergies with the Abominant itself and with the Biophagus, for example, and I feel like all they're really lacking is a bit of raw hitting power and durability, which could be achieved with a points cut. Next up, we've got Eternal Conquerors, the Necron objective secured trait. That one would count as 2 selections, similar to the Eldar Hail of Doom. Again, I feel like this one might not be the worst change in the world for Necron army lists, presuming other things stayed the same. Just about every single Necron competitive list at the moment tends to take the Eternal Conquerors and Relentlessly Expansionist combination, the pre-game move and the objective secured, and in general Necrons have had a pretty decent amount of success within the Nephilim meta. If you tones down that combo, you might actually see some of the other Tomb Worlds getting played. I guess quite a lot of people might just switch to Nihilak, which gets OBSEC, and also another couple of boosts, but you might see more play of things like Novok or Mefrit for melee or shooting Necrons. I would say though that Necrons might be in a place where a few nerfs like that might just turn them into one of the weaker armies in the game once more. I feel like their actual unit power is kind of okay, but a lot of their wins are being carried by their spectacular secondary objectives, forcing opponents to have to come to them and put themselves on the back foot. If they both nerf the secondaries and the objective secured trait, I feel like they probably are going to be one of the weaker armies in 40k again, which wouldn't be the most fun. Maybe they could give them a bit of a shuffle as a faction, nerf their secondaries and the subjective trait, but actually make a bunch of their weaker units a fair bit stronger to compensate for the nerfs. Finally, for Tyranids, we've got Hive Tyrants can't be shielded by Tyrant Guard. Tyranids certainly are one of the strongest factions in the game, with a whole bunch of very good datasheets for what they do. I'm not sure if this is my favourite nerf for them though, as it sort of defeats the point of Tyrant Guard being the bodyguards of the Hive Tyrants, and if they can't do that, then they're not really going to be any good. I feel like this will be one way to help the problem, but I feel like if they were going to do a rules change, then maybe limiting overrun on the Winged Hive Tyrant might be a good way to do it. Currently, I'd say one of the biggest problems is the Winged Hive Tyrant jumps out, annihilates something with the Reaper of Obliterax, and then spends 1 CP to run 17 inches back behind the Tyrant Guard or behind line of sight blocking terrain. Perhaps if they nerfed Overrun to just be something like a 6-inch move after you've fought or something, that might tone down the worst excesses of that combo and still mean that they can be shielded by the Tyrant Guard as they move up the board. Anyway, apparently a fun little wish list. I guess we'll wait and see what changes actually happen in the balanced data slate. It does sound that general internet opinion has labelled these as a complete fake at the moment, though I must admit it would be kind of funny if Games Workshop did just publish the data slate and all of these were on the money. Let me know what you think of the proposed changes and what would you do to help out the struggling factions of 40k or nerf the top ones. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k stuff coming. I do tend to post new things most days. Otherwise, if you have been enjoying all the 40k discussion on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, an enormous thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.